really excited for this week's episode of Language of Love Conversation with Ainslie MacLeod. He's a past life psychic, spiritual teacher, author. His newest book is The Old Soul's Guidebook: Who You Are, Why You're Here, and How to Navigate Life on Earth. We get into it all. What the heck are past lives? What is a soul? Why do we have past lives? Are they real? And how learning about your past lives actually sets you free in ways that therapy might take years to do. We also, of course, get into the loss of my sweet boy, Sammy, and the sole purpose of that, as well as the real deal on soulmates and twin flames. What are they really? How many soulmates do we really have? We get into it all on this week's episode. I can't wait for you to listen. Ainslie MacLeod, I'm so grateful that you're joining us.
Well, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So I have had such a good time diving into all your content and teachings. And, you know, my peeps know that in addition to focusing on how to love and be loved better, which we definitely will be addressing in this episode in all sorts of interesting ways, that I take a very spiritual approach to life. And I talk a lot about, and people are very interested in talking about soulmates and soul paths and soul journeys and past lives. And so we're going to be diving into all of that.
Well, that's my world. So
yeah, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to talk to you about this. I know your newest book, The Old Soul's Guidebook: Who You Are, Why You're Here, and How to Navigate Life on Earth, probably addresses all of this. And we'll have the links to everything in the show notes when the podcast, is up, and you guys will be able to access all of those links to learn more about Ainslie MacLeod and his work. But let's start with the basics, because a lot of folks, to me, I feel like I've understood that the soul is eternal and that I've had many past lives and probably am a pretty old soul.
Yes.
But most people, since I was a little girl, I kind of was attuned to that. But a lot of people I talk to, this is new content for them. So can we start with the basics of like, what is a past life and how does that play out and what it all means?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's something that I never even thought about until I kind of started, fell into this work, and then I found that reincarnation really explains everything. And of course, if you have reincarnation, then you have past lives.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems like, it's like looking at those pictures of an iceberg, where you just see the top and they show all the stuff underneath. And that's the hidden part, that's the, I always say, I don't think you can truly understand who you are and why you're here if you don't take into account where you've been and all the experience that your soul's had.
And so how would you define reincarnation then?
Well, it's a process that souls use to really get growth. If you came into this world just once, you'd never get anything done. Maybe you died age 3, or you never really get on your life plan, or stuck in the poverty trap and can't accomplish the things your soul would like to. It's by coming back time and time again in different circumstances. You're flipping all the time from one gender to another, or in between, or whatever, different sexual orientation, different parts of the world. You've been rich, you've been poor, you've been black, white, brown, everything in between. And it's this experience that gives the soul understanding of what it really is to be human, which is, ultimately, one of the major goals for the soul. So I liken coming back all the time. It's like the soul wants kind of master's level education in what it is to be human and to learn about love and empathy and compassion and so on, rather than just coming in for an evening class.
Makes a big master's level. Some of us feel like we're getting multiple PhDs.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting just talking about the soul. I think the premise that we're working from, that you and I agree on, and obviously, everybody can have their own opinion about this, but that the soul is our true selves, our essential self, our core, right? And the soul is what enervates us, and from which we are created. And the idea is that our soul is eternal. And by the way, this applies and is found in every religion and
Yes.
every discipline and every perspective. So this isn't about religion or debunking religion or spirituality or that argument about religion and spirituality. This is just about the fact that we all are souls inhabiting a human body, right?
I think that's the fundamental. That is the core. Yeah.
Yeah. And that we are in this body for however long we're in it until that body dies. And then the soul goes back to source, goes back to oneness, God, universe, whatever you want to call it. And I think so to translate back to what you were just saying, if I understand you correctly, is that, as a soul, we're constantly expanding and learning and evolving. And one of the ways we do that is by having this human experience. And what you're saying is that we come back again and again and again in all these different incarnations and versions of humans to have the full breadth. So the bottom line is that we keep coming back to have this human experience, to have all of these different experiences and colors, shapes, sizes, everything.
Right.
Because that's what allows our soul to learn and expand. And, so then when we talk about past lives, and I do want to find out how you even got into all of this, as I understand it from you, your teaching is really about, by understanding our past lives, we can put in context this life and what our soul's purpose is in this lifetime. Am I
I
paraphrasing
think I think that's beautifully said. Well, I think the thing about finding past lives, and I've been doing it for about 25 years, is that you find the sort of themes sometimes. The kind you can tell from what maybe didn't get completed in past life that's something you might want to then work on in this one. You can find trauma in past lives that shows up as fears, phobias, limiting beliefs, even physical blocks and ailments as well can be tied to past lives as well. It really offers a lot of healing as well as just understanding. It's sort of it can really do some healing to the soul. People often say, well, what about, you're talking about past life trauma, but what about stuff that happens in this life? Well, sure. I mean, we have awful things, traumatic events will happen in this life, but how we respond to them is totally related to whatever has happened in our past lives. So it's why you could get two people with the same traumatic experience as children, two siblings. One sees it all in terms of betrayal, the other sees it all in terms of rejection,
Yeah.
or maybe it creates low self-esteem or something. But we get two different responses, and it depends on what has happened in the past life. Because what happens in this life is not the cause of the fear; it's the trigger. It's a trigger. It
It's the
triggers memories.
catalyst.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I remember when I first sort of started understanding and learning about past lives and understanding our past lives and even having access to that. It was originally through reading Brian Weiss's book, right? Many Lives, Many Masters. And I did do work with some past life regressionists. And it was what I thought was really powerful about it. And I'm wondering about your take is that, as a therapist, both wearing my therapist hat and my human hat, what I thought was so profound about it is and I'll give you the example of one of the things that I discovered, that when you see the picture of your past life as it pertains to a challenge or a trauma or a drama or a struggle in your current life, it's like all of a sudden your attachment and stuckness in the situation shifts just with that understanding. And that's one of the things that was so astounding to me as a therapist, where you usually have to do a lot more to get someone unstuck.
Right. It can be just like that,
Yeah.
I mean, I've literally worked with people where they've blown through like a major past life issue or major issue in this life, just in the moment they hear about it, literally as I'm telling somebody about the past life. There's an example I put in my latest book. When you've been beheaded in a past life, which sounds horrible, but it's actually a little bit more common than you might think. And
Yeah.
so it does show up from time to time. It translates to neck and shoulder pain in this life. Funnily enough, if you've been hanged in a past life, it'll be throat issues or neck issues, but it's the neck and shoulder. That's the sign of having been beheaded. I mean, of course, it's not the reason everybody has neck and shoulder pain.
Yeah. But it's often correlated.
Absolutely. So when it shows up in the past life, I can kind of make that prediction. So I was working with this person, and all my sessions are over the phone. So I was, I'm telling her, that you were beheaded in the past life. Do you have any neck and shoulder pain? And she said she'd had 20 years of chronic neck and shoulder pain, and it literally disappeared as we're talking about it. The moment the soul hears about the past life and can make that connection, that was then. This is now.
Yeah.
We can let
We
this
can let
go.
that one go. Oops, I was holding on
It's
to
like,
something
yeah,
I
and
didn't need to hold on to.
Right. And I always say it's like with a whimper, not with a bang. It's not like, oh my gosh. It's like the soul going, oh, okay. Let's move on
That's
then.
that makes a lot of sense. Is that what you talk about, what you mean when you talk about the Achilles body parts?
Yes.
Like our Achilles heels, that there
Achilles
are these
body parts. Yeah, these are areas of weakness in the body, and that are related to whatever's happened in the past life. That person with the neck and shoulder pain, she actually turned up at a couple of my events, and I was actually telling her story. I didn't know what she looked like. She's in the audience, and I thought she just had a question. She's going, "That was me."
That was me you're talking about. Well, I'll tell you. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the pain had gone. She's actually a ballroom dance teacher, so she has to kind of move her neck and shoulders a lot, and it's just gone after 20 years.
Wow. So my example that I like to share is that I was struck. This was many years ago, and I was really struggling with my oldest son, who now almost more than 10 years later is thriving and wonderful. At the time, he was really struggling, and I was really like, I knew that I was too codependent with him in his pain, and there were ways. We didn't have a conflicted relationship. I was more of his life preserver than anything else, but it had evolved to the point where I was drowning with him, and I wasn't helping him, and it wasn't working, and I didn't know how to stop it. And I really just went into this past life regression. And my understanding is that you work a little differently than past life regression that we're going to get into in a minute. But in this case, I was taken through this deep kind of hypnosis meditation guided into the past life as it pertained. Really, what I presented was the struggles my son was having. It wasn't really even about me. But what was fascinating is what came out was this very clear, I even drew it and painted it. I have it somewhere, this very clear image. I could see myself as, I was like early teens. I could see what I was wearing, what I looked like. And my son was my little brother, who was like 7 or 8. And we were somewhere in Eastern Europe, and there was a pogrom or something where people were coming in and attacking and burning the fields. So we're running through the fields. I'm grabbing onto him, yanking him through. We get separated. Don't know what happened to our parents or anything else. And then we're walking, like running, hiding. And we're walking down this railroad track in the middle of these deep, deep woods. There's nothing around. We're really hiding because I think we were Jewish or something. And if people found out, we were in danger. And then we're walking for days, and he can't keep up. And we're starting to starve, and we can't take care of ourselves. And I can't keep dragging him along. And finally, I say to him, okay, you stay here. I'm going to go try to find some food or find some help or something and come back and get you. And so I go, and it's actually not far, ironically, until I find this road, and someone picks me up and takes me to this old woman in the community that took in strays and whatever. And she was a very wealthy woman. And I saw this is all, like, I could write this like a novel, but I saw the whole story. And then she takes me in. I don't tell anyone who I am. I create a new identity, and I keep meaning to think, okay, I got to run back and get my brother, but I was too scared. And I ended up never going back for him.
Wow.
Someone and had this very comfortable life, but I was always in this silent agony of guilt and shame because I had left him behind. And so in the regression, we kind of went through what happened to him, and that he had died, and made peace with that. And then it was like that dynamic between us, it's hard to describe, like immediately shifted inside me. And I went home and I actually told him about it. And he, in these days, like would roll his eyes at me. He thought I was crazy. You know, he was a young teenager. To this day, 10 years later, if I'm, you know, fussing at him about something, he's like, I'm not the one who abandoned me in a pogrom. You know, he's always like commenting on that. But that is like, it's hard to describe, like at that moment when I went through that, understood that. It wasn't like when I went back home, I had to intellectually process it and remember it. It just like immediately changed the dynamics between us.
Right. Absolutely. You change immediately. The moment you're aware of that past life, and as you change, well, it changes the dynamic, it changes other people around you. There's so many things that now, if I found a past life like that, what I would tell you, I would run through some very obvious things that I would expect. One is when you've left someone, you know, forced to, it's not, you know, there's no karma there, or, you know, you haven't, you know, you didn't willfully abandon him. You know, your soul might feel, gosh, I should have done more, or something like that. But what it does is it creates what's called a fear of death. It's not actually a fear of your own mortality, but when your soul feels that you were responsible for someone's death, or even your own death in a past life, through maybe something like carelessness or neglect, you know,
Or
abandoning a child,
selfishness, which
or
this kind of
selfishness.
felt like.
Yeah. Well, what's
Yeah.
going to happen is in this life, you're going to feel overly responsible, not just for that soul, but for other people's happiness and well-being.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's about right.
Overly
That's
responsible,
my
or
mantra to myself. Just because I can fix it doesn't mean that I should, or that it's my job to do so.
exactly. It's not always your job, but that's how you're programmed. You know, you feel like, oh my gosh, I got to make sure everyone's okay. It's an overcorrection, if you like, from the past life. There's another way it sometimes shows up. The same fear will show up, and that's around decision making. And that's if your soul feels that you made a poor decision. You know, it might feel like, oh, I should have stayed with him or something. Then it shows up a bit of a challenge making decisions. Funnily enough, it's often over little things. Like I always use the example of choosing between two things on a restaurant menu. You know, no one's going to
Yeah.
die if you choose the fish instead of the steak or whatever. I joke about I put this in the book. This is why surf and turf was invented. It's for people who can't make up their
For people
mind.
like me.
You know?
Yeah,
But these are just
it's
signs.
amazing.
Mhm.
And I guess at this point, you're sort of an outlier, as Malcolm Gladwell would say. You know, you've done so many of these that you've been able to kind of see the patterns and the correlations. And
Yeah,
so,
I've done my
um,
10,000 hours.
yeah, you've done your 10,000 hours. So how did this start for you? Because, you know, my understanding is that it was a lot about your guides, right? That
Yeah.
were, you get the information a different way than regression or that kind of thing.
Well, you know, the way I got into it was that I kept hearing from psychics. I was psychic and I should be doing something about it. Uh, but nobody ever said, well, this is how you get started, or, you know, so I was kind of going, who, me? You know, it's like, I didn't exactly feel psychic. In fact, my life had felt like such a series of blunders. I thought, I felt like the least psychic person in the world. But I kept hearing from psychics also that a particular uncle who had died, that he was a spirit guide and wanted to work with me. And then this is a story I talk about a lot. This was so powerful and life changing for me. It was totally transforming. Is that I was on a trip to Hawaii. I was walking around a bookshop one morning. I was in a very altered state, and I really knew it. I mean, I was feeling, wow, what the heck's happening here? And I just turned a little corner in the middle of Borders bookstore, and there was my uncle, been dead 10 years at that point, and he was about a foot away from me, just there and gone. He was there for about a second, but real. I mean, it was like not a shimmery
It was
kind
like
of
he was in
ghostly.
3D.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally, totally. And also, interestingly, not exactly how I remembered him, if you like, but more like he actually was, which is, you know, quite fascinating. And it was just like a I don't know, like a, yes, a three-dimensional kind of projections or something, but with a clear message about wanting to work with me. So a couple of weeks later, I was back in the mainland and just thought, well, let me just try it. And I found that I could connect.
How did you connect?
Just sat down and went, okay, John, are you, if I'm supposed to work with you, are you there? You know, and it was like, oh, found that I could get some response. It was very rudimentary. I mean, I would never have made a career out of it. Like in the first few weeks, it was
Yeah.
like really slow going, and it's very uncertain about what I was doing. But just over time, I built the confidence. What a lot of people go through, I think, when they start doing this kind of work, is that concern about, is it just my
Yeah.
imagination?
Am I
Am I
making
making
this
this
shit
up?
up? That's what I ask
Um,
when I get these
and
downloads.
what was helpful was that I could check out things that he told me first time we ever spoke. I said he had been in the RAF in Britain during World War II, and I said, okay, give me a list of planes that you flew. And then there was one that seemed very unlikely, and I thought, is this me? It's my imagination. But I called my dad and the next day, and I went, hey, just out of curiosity, could you confirm something here? And he went, oh yeah, sure, and it was like, oh wow. And also I would keep a dictionary beside me when I start, the early days, because every so often a word would come up and I wouldn't know the meaning, but I'd look it up and I go, wow, well done, spirit
So you
guides.
were hearing words you didn't even know you'd never
Right.
heard before, didn't know that, or didn't
Yeah.
know the definition of.
And they would always be the most appropriate word for in the context. So that helped me very quickly to build confidence that it really was coming from another source. And then, of course, when I started working with people, and you get that kind of, oh my God, even my own mother doesn't know that, that sort of response. Of course, that's validating. But the other thing that happened very quickly when I actually spent 3 years practicing, way more than I should have, according to the spirit guides. Like they were trying to get me, come
Let's
on.
go.
I was so afraid of making like a blunder or making a mistake,
Aw.
like, oh my gosh, what if I tell somebody something that's wrong and they base their entire life on this. But yeah, after about 3 years, I started reading people, and what I found very quickly was that past lives showed up all the time, because initially I wasn't really clear. It wasn't even clear with the spirit world exactly what my focus would be.
Yeah.
But I started to get more and more interested and intrigued by this whole past life and reincarnation thing, which, to be honest, I hadn't really believed in before, and now it just absolutely makes such sense. And I mean, I really do believe there's nothing about we humans that isn't in some way past life related.
Well, I mean, it
Of
makes
regression,
sense.
talking of regression, I did one or maybe two regressions in the very early days, thinking, this is what you do. I was
Right.
so bored, like half an hour relaxing somebody, half an hour listening to them go, oh, I think I see a house. And I'm going, oh, for God's sake.
Yeah,
just
because
walk
you
in
could
the
just
door.
see it
I thought,
yourself.
yeah. So it
Yeah.
just became quicker for me to say, okay, look, there's this, that, and then that happened. And then I found even people come back to me and they go, oh my God, my pain's gone, or my fear of this is gone, or whatever it is. And of course, that's super validating as well.
Yeah. And so at this point, obviously your uncle is one of your guides, but I'm assuming you have a whole team
Yeah.
that instructs. And do you know who they are? I mean, because we all have tons of spirit guides. We just don't tap into them like you do. Some of us do. And maybe if we have time, I'll ask you, for some tips and tools for all of us to kind of tune into our guides more. But I want to ask you about soul families, because or soul groups, and in particular about soul mates, because I have my own opinions about soul mates, and since this show is about a love and be loved better, it comes up a lot. And I do find that, so in a minute I'm going to have you tell us what a soul, in your idea of what a soulmate is. But also I think a lot of people use this concept of like twin flames and this person is my soulmate to justify staying in really toxic situations, and like, oh no, my soul won't grow. I signed up for this and my soul won't grow unless I stay in this really dysfunctional relationship. So I'm wondering whether you can speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we come into the world. If you're an old soul, and you're a very old soul, you've been kicking around on this plane for back and forth between here and the astral plane for maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years. It's roughly that long. You are you are old, and you think of in that time of all the experiences that you've had, it's all contributed to make you who you are.
Yeah.
Now, when you're a young soul, you come in your very first life. There's a bunch of souls that come in all around the same time. This is like an extended soul family, very, very large group of souls. I mean, many thousands, maybe tens of thousands, and you all come come in roughly at the same time, and it's like a horse race. Off you go. Some of us fall at the first fence, we fall behind, and so on. We reach the end at different rates, but the older the soul gets, the more it wants to interact with members of its soul family, because
Mhm.
one of the major goals, it's a major goal, by the way, for you in this life, is you're seeking intimacy. I mean, it's a big thing for souls anyway, but it becomes a major focus for certain lives, and it certainly is a major one. It's really up for you in this life. And I can talk more about that if you like. But
Yeah, sure.
you don't get to a more intimate place with those you want to interact with. It's much easier with somebody who's from your soul family, and maybe somebody you've known before. An old friend is what my guides would call them. And so as an old soul, you're looking for a soulmate or soulmates. That thing you were talking about. Oh my God, I get people. And I put this in my first book where somebody came to see me. I was working out of a shop, and the first thing, I mean, almost before she sat down, I said, "Oh my God, are you being physically abused at home or something?" And she goes, "Yeah, oh, my husband's got anger issues, and yeah, he's violent." And I'm going, "Oh my God, what are you doing with her?" And with that guy, and she goes, "Well, I feel I'm meant to be with him."
Yeah.
And it was like, oh no, like there's a lesson. And I was saying, no, the lesson is to protect yourself.
Yeah.
You don't,
To
you
value
want,
yourself enough to get the hell out. That's your
absolutely.
lesson, girl.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know what happened to her. She's an older lady, and I never saw her again. But gosh, I hope she didn't stick around. None of us are here to be used as punching bags for other people.
Yeah, I feel like when
Unfortunately,
that happens, it's part of our journey. Like it's the catalyst. It's to set us up. And sometimes things have to get bad enough before we're willing to stand for ourselves or value ourselves or learn to set boundaries or accept how worthy of love we are or whatever that soul lesson is,
yeah,
that we came here to learn. But I do have that experience, and I have for most of my life, but certainly in my adult life, and certainly over the past 5 to 10 years, where I meet people and, it's like a joke with many of my closest friends who I met this way, because we laugh about how I'm like, oh, hello. I don't know you, but we're going to be really good friends.
right.
Like I recognize
You
them. I don't know
absolutely do.
why. And I'm like, oh, we're going to be really good friends. I don't even know who you are, but just so you know, I'm
That's
adopted you,
that is that soul to soul connection.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a feeling of comfort, of familiarity,
And
and
love, like deep
yeah,
love.
and that it is a soul to soul, heart to heart connection that we make. There is this myth about there being one soulmate, and my spirit guides don't even acknowledge that twin flame thing. There,
Yeah.
there's something they talk. It's too esoteric to not necessary to go into right now. It can sort of give the sense of that, but we have this idea that we meet a soulmate and we're like swans. We're bonded for life, and we sail into the sunset together, and everything is
Mhm.
just sweetness and light. And it doesn't always work like that, because you can have an agreement with a soul. You're supposed to be together, and the agreement between souls is never. There's nothing mandatory, and that's really important to recognize, because I think I've done it myself. You think, oh, this is a soulmate, and I really need to stick with it. And you're being abused, and thinking all sorts of shit, and going, oh yeah, I better stick this out because it's a soulmate. But we have multiple agreements to make sure that, and they're not fallback positions. They could be, the next one could be even better or completely different or whatever. But the soul does make multiple agreements. Very few people are
Like
meant to be alone. So
loose agreements, like, okay,
yeah,
I'm going to show up in your life
yeah,
and I'm going to be an asshole. I'm paraphrasing. I'm sure this isn't how our souls say it, but like, I'm going to be a complete asshole to you and restrict you and put pressure on you so that you can have the experience. Like, I'll be the one that does that for you so that you can have the experience of breaking free of that dynamic.
well,
Or
it's kind of along those lines. We make these agreements, and they're not firm.
yeah,
A romantic agreement, like a soulmate agreement, would
yeah,
be to say, "Let's try. Let's try to hit it off. Let's see if we can make it work."
I see.
And people often feel, oh, then there's that obligation. But if one of the partners, if you get involved with somebody and then they cheat on you, it doesn't matter how many lives you've had together or how great a soulmate this is, they've violated the terms of the agreement.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're under the agreement becomes null and void. So you're no longer under any kind of obligation. And I wish more people recognize this. That we're I see so many people. Like I say, I've done it myself
Yeah.
many times. I'm sticking things out because for different reasons. Often low self-esteem, loads of past life stuff play into why people stay in abusive relationships as well.
Yeah, and also the ways that, and I think it's important also for people to understand this who have left relationships. Even if, it doesn't mean you have to have been abused or cheated on to have left a relationship.
Right.
But if you have left a relationship, that's part of your soul's path too. Like, let me check this out with you, because this is how I imagine it, our soul's path. That like we come here, like a GPS machine. We come here with the destination plugged in. Like, okay, this is the general trajectory I'm on and what I'm trying to learn, right? But then in our human experience, like it's not like every step we take and every move we make is predestined and determined. Like we keep taking detours and wrong turns, or decide to just make a different turn or take a different route. And in the end, like we're still kind of moving toward our destination, and the destination, our soul's purpose, our soul's intention is still there. We just are making all these detours along the way.
I think that's beautifully said. Oh my God. One of the things that drives me nuts is that sort of belief that, or when people say, "Oh, everything's just meant to be,"
Yeah.
this, like we have no free will. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like setting the destination, and then anything can happen on
Yeah.
the way.
That's part of the
And
fun.
right, well, it's how
It
you
may
get
not feel
all the
like
growth.
fun while we're here, but from our soul's perspective, it's kind of like a video game. You're having an experience.
If everything was just meant to be, there'd be no point in coming. There'd be no growth.
Yeah.
So no, life throws stuff at you. Like shit happens. It's a messy world that we're in. The growth comes from really how you deal with it. There's something that I think these are probably some of the wisest words that I've ever heard from my spirit guides. Is that the experience is not the lesson. The lesson is what you draw from the experience, and there's
Mm,
always a positive lesson if you look for it, no matter how challenging the experience itself is. And the lesson very often is about looking for ways to transcend the situation and heal yourself from these things. I mean, like I was saying, none of us are here to be. We don't sign up to be abused. That stuff happens. I mean, for example, you're a super empath. You're a very, very strong person. It's kind of interesting when I did a little reading. I hope you don't mind.
no,
Um,
I'm
but
curious.
you
Tell
have
me.
that sort of interesting combination of being very, very strong, but also very, very gentle at the same time. Sometimes that sort of a little bit more masculine energy can block the empathy, but in your case, it hasn't. What I call a super empath. Very, very, very deep feeling, and a lot of that comes from your soul age. I mean, we develop empathy just over lifetimes. The more often we come back, the more we recognize that what's happening to other people, could be happening to us.
Yeah. And
And
actually is happening to us because we're all
exactly,
one.
yeah, exactly. That's the big lesson. The problem with being highly empathic, and a lot of people who would be drawn to you and your work will be highly empathic too. The risk is that the bullies will find them. So it has been a major theme of my life. I've suffered a lot from narcissistic abuse,
Me
and
too.
I know, and it's like it's this strange draw that bullies and narcissists don't pick on each other. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. They need a
but
nice, juicy codependent to
oh,
pick
they
on.
do, absolutely. And then it becomes utterly fascinating. I taught a few classes in this, and I'm actually next year I'm going to be putting together a whole program and a book on healing from narcissistic
Oh,
abuse,
good.
because
I need that.
it's an epidemic. It's the
Yes, it
other
is.
pandemic, and so many of my clients have had to deal with this, and
Yeah.
and often just confused. They don't know what's going on. All the gaslighting, all the
Yep. Yep.
things that narcissists will do, but one of the things that I found most fascinating about it is that it's all spiritual. This whole dynamic between narcissists and empaths it's a spiritual issue. You're never going to be able to heal a narcissist through
Right,
talk therapy or something like
right,
that, because
right,
it's a spiritual issue. It's and they don't think there's anything wrong with them.
right. So they're not open to
Yeah,
therapy.
they're extremely ego driven, but they're extremely fear driven.
Yes.
Now they have all the fears, as my spirit guides would identify. They have a minimum of 12 fears. So basically, whatever fear you have as an old soul empath, they have the same one. The difference is because they're coming from a place of ego, they externalize their fears, and you internalize. So let's say you
Mm,
have a fear of inferiority. This comes from being treated as if you have no value, treated as lesser in a past life. You're going to have all those, the signs in this life would be codependency, tendency to settle, low self-esteem, the and you will internalize all that sort of thing. You'll beat yourself up and feel lousy about, oh, I did this.
right.
Become your own worst enemy. The narcissist doesn't create the wound. They find the wound and they stick the knife in
Yeah,
there
they pour that
specifically.
salt in there. Yeah.
Absolutely. uh, because they're externalizing their fear. Like if you have a fear of judgment, this comes from maybe being judged and executed in a past life. So then in this life, it most often shows up as a fear of public speaking. It was a huge one for me. I mean, 30 years I didn't speak in public. I would never have done something like come on your show. It was like, oh my God, I'd have run a mile. All going back to a past life, which I
Yeah.
then worked through. And now it's that joke, you can't shut me up. But so if you got judgment, you're criticizing your inner critic is going to be full on all the time. You're beating yourself up, and that narcissist will they have the same fears, so they will, but they
You'll
externalize it, so they
attract
will
in a
criticize,
narcissist. Yeah.
put
Yeah.
downs, all that sort of thing. So you touched on it before. Boundaries, setting boundaries is it's almost like the deterrent. If you can heal the fears,
Yeah.
and I'll be showing this on the book, how to do this on the course. If you can heal your own fears, they're like a shark, those narcissists. They're swimming along, they smell blood in the water, and poof, off they go
Yeah,
after you.
and I don't even think they're conscious of it. It's totally
No,
unconscious.
it's
It's not like
all
they're
happening on
rubbing
the
their hands. It's just
yeah,
intuitive. They're almost
yeah,
empathic in a different way.
yes, in a
They're
very
very intuitive, and
screwed
so
up,
they
twisted
intuitively
way.
know. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I want to ask you about this because my evolution, I consider myself a recovering codependent, and I've lived a life surrounded. I mean, every close relationship I've had has, especially with men, has been with a narcissist, including my dad, who was a very significant narcissist. I mean, a wonderful human being in many ways, but a very wounded one, and did a lot of damage. And boundaries, absolutely. And fears, preventing the boundaries, absolutely. But and I wanted to ask you about this because Lord knows we talk about Sammy, my son, having died a year and a half ago, or maybe a little more at this point, which to me was the worst possible thing. Like, there's nothing
Yeah,
worse.
there
There's
is nothing
literally
worse.
nothing worse that could happen to me.
Yeah,
And when the worst possible thing that could ever happen happened, it's hard to explain. Like, along with earth-shattering devastation and being curled up in a ball and unable to function, and in the darkest night of my soul, which I'm still climbing out of, there was this strange liberation, because it was like the worst thing had happened and there's nothing to be afraid of anymore.
yeah,
And like all of a sudden I had zero tolerance for anything that my body didn't say yes to, including how someone speaks to me, including who I spend my time with, how I spend my time, what I say yes to, total opposite of what I would have been before. I would have had to really talk myself into and feel really guilty about saying no to something, knew I was
yeah,
going to really disappoint someone by saying no to, or, saying affirm, like, ew, don't talk to me that way, to the narcissist, whoever that is in my life that I'm, trying to continue. Like, it would take so much. I would do it, but I had to really gin up the courage, and it was really uncomfortable. And now it's like, no, don't fuck with me. Like, I have
it
no time. Like, I don't give a
it
shit.
is
The worst has
liberating.
happened. It
Yeah,
is total liberation.
And the experience is not the lesson. The lesson is what you draw from it. And what I think is really inspiring is what you've taken away from that. Because when you go through something as devastating and as traumatic as that, you do need some time to lick your wounds.
Yeah.
You have to curl up in a fetal position for a while. You have to go through the sadness and the grief and so on. But when you come out of it, it's like going into a wave and or deep into a
Yeah.
trough of a wave and
Right.
then back out of it. You realize these things are survivable. Now, it's actually
Mhm.
that experience has triggered in you past life fear of loss,
Mm.
and the loss teaches your soul. Loss in past lives teaches your soul that bad things can and do happen. It sometimes robs you of the ability to be sort of complacent about life or just assume that everything is going to just work out. Tomorrow will just be like today. But that is actually there is something healing about that. I think, particularly what you're saying, can't get any worse. Yeah,
Right.
bad things can do happen, but they are survivable.
Yeah.
And I think also when you've had something really traumatic like that, you do lose your tolerance for the bullshit.
Yeah.
You see what's important and what's not. And so when somebody, they act out or, start being a pain in the ass, it's like, you're much more likely to go, oh, you
Yeah. Go on with your
know,
bad self. I don't
good,
have time
yeah,
for that.
yeah, right,
And
absolutely.
so
And
let
and
me
and
ask you. Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I
What
was
were you?
just one more thing I was just going to say that major loss like that will also remind the soul that you don't have forever yourself. It's a
Right.
reminder of mortality,
Yeah,
and
it
that
definitely is.
you don't want to spend your time with people who are unsupportive or you know aren't don't have your back or that are annoying or whatever it is. Life is too short.
Yeah,
It
that
really
was
is.
immediate. That was almost immediate. And I've been really connecting with that this far out now, as looking back, that there was a very specific moment. It was probably like a week after he died. And I don't know why, like all of a sudden, I was aware that I needed to make a choice to stay alive. Like it was literally a choice point. Like, am I going to live or am I going to let myself die? Not that I would have killed myself because that's not my personality type, but I probably would have generated some life-killing illness in myself or
Right.
something, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But like I was aware that I was in choice in that moment. And at the same moment, it almost felt like a download. I was being shown and integrated into me that I was like, I mean, I was always aware of this. We're all aware of what a gift it is to be alive, but it's hard to explain. It was like in 5D on steroids. Like I could fully understand what a miracle it is that I get to be in this body
Yeah.
and have this experience, and what an amazing God-given gift it is that I get to be alive, and that it's a gift that can change in a minute. Like none of us know what's going to happen in a minute or an hour, or, like my son, 1 minute I was talking to him, the next minute he was gone, right? Like none of us know what's going to happen a minute
Right.
from now, much less an hour or a year. So like to really value the miracle that life is and to choose to embrace it and to live it was a very conscious decision that I made.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was being taken it wasn't like I sat down and said, am I going to live? It was like I was taken into that decision, if that makes sense, as I was in that really dark night.
That's sometimes it takes something like this to really connect us so deeply with our soul and the whole spiritual world. And when you go through loss, like I say, you have to go through that initial period where if you just
Can't
kind of
function.
it's like,
Can't think.
everything's okay, everything's just meant to be, it's
Yeah.
like God must have a plan for my son or whatever. That is like spiritual bypassing it,
Yes,
and
I
it's
agree. I did that when my mom died, and then I had breast cancer within a year.
oh boy. Yeah.
But let me ask you this because you're reminding me of the other part of my question, because, a lot of my audience, like me, has had a child lost, which is obviously a worse thing, and all of us have lost. If we live long enough, we're going to have heartbreak. We're going to have tragedy. and maybe not with us in person, but to people we love or to people around us. And so I feel like this is relevant to everyone, even though I'm selfishly asking, because I'm curious what your take on this is. With Sammy, is your sense from your guides, from your perspective, from the way you look at life, is your sense that on a certain level, this was part of his soul's path, and or whatever he took in that moment that he didn't know was fentanyl and not whatever Xanax, whatever he thought he was taking? Once he took, because I've thought about this, once he took that fentanyl that he didn't know he was taking, had he survived, the whole trajectory of his life would have been fucked. Excuse my language, but it would have been. And he would, because it's 3 times as addictive as heroin. So he would have been fighting. He would have been a heroin addict times 3 for and that is not easy to survive, much less heal from. And whatever trajectory he was on was forever changed. And I've often wondered if at that moment, his soul was like, okay, we got to pull you because there's no way you can fulfill your soul's purpose now. Or was it that when his soul came into this life, his soul knew that there was going to be a point, and all the ripples that death created was going to help all of his soul family and all of his soul growth catalyze their directions, and that it was and that this was part of his agreement to sign up to do? Or is it something totally different and just fate or circumstance or accident or whatever?
Well, something that happens so far into a person's life like that would not be, it would not be part of the life plan. It's it's more likely to fall into that category of just shit happens on the physical plane. I know we try to look for meaning,
yeah,
and of course, I mean, I have a lot of clients who do that, and I have the deepest sympathy, but because we're all like that. We hold souls, we want to find meaning, and sometimes there, like I say, it's not meant to be. There is one thing that can happen, is that if the soul feels like, yeah, we could end up with, even in a worse situation, it may lose the will to live, as it were. Because sometimes when I'm looking at a past life, my spirit guides will describe the person's death with a physical ailment plus a mental condition. So they'll say something like they died of cholera and grief. Now, what that means is that they probably had lost family members ahead of themselves. They get sick, and there's no will to survive. So, and I do. There was somebody I worked with years ago had lost her son, and she was asking if it was because he'd been sort of in some suicidal ideation there, but what had happened is he dived into a river, never came up. And what I found was that he started like losing control, or starting to drown basically, and didn't bother to really try and save himself. It was just like, oh, okay, well, that's probably just how I go. Partly because of this soul carrying a fear of failure, disappointment, and doing a sort of,
which affected his will to live, which then, when faced in that moment of choice that we're often not even conscious of, that's really the predictor of whether you survive illness, I think, in a large part. It's not the only variable, but like the drive to live plays such a huge role in whether or not you survive illnesses or challenges or near-death experiences.
Yeah. So, specifically with Sammy, I mean, we need to work together. So I can, if you're up for that, and we could have a look into all of that and see, because I'd have to really work with my spirit guides to see what all the, the nuances and things were. So I couldn't give you a definitive answer, but
we'll have to book a session and get to the bottom of that, because I do feel that his death, whether, and I would have never, ever wanted it. If I could go back in time and change it, I would do anything to do that.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, I can look around me and see all the beautiful healing ripples that his death has created.
Yeah.
in some cases, changing the trajectory of people's lives. I mean, it certainly has changed the trajectory of mine. But,
Right.
all the people that I've heard from whose child came to them after they heard Sammy's story and said, here's the Percocet I just ordered from someone on Snapchat. I'm not going to take it. Or like so many he saved so many lives with his story. And he's changed so many relationships, and the pain of his loss. The other thing that really astounded me is that many people really close to me, who had very close relationships with him by proxy because they're close to me, and some of them had, sort of a friendly, close relationship to him as one of their good friends' kids, right? But his death was a wake-up call for so many people I know, where then they changed their entire lives because they were like, fuck this, if Sammy can die like this, life is fragile. And they went through their own dark night of the soul, not even necessarily because Sammy wasn't on the planet anymore, if that makes sense, but because he died.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is what your soul would always want to take from an experience like this. How do we transcend this? How do we grow? How can we help other people as well? The ripple effect can be absolutely enormous. There's something that my spirit guides say: you can never be an effective grief counselor if you've never lost anyone. And what they always mean is that your experience is something you bring to the table. So, if you're going to be a life coach or a healer or whatever, look at your experience and how that will affect other people as well. And if you've had that fear of loss triggered, one of the most effective ways to heal that is to help others.
Yeah.
We live in a world where people live in such isolation as well, and when they lose somebody, they often go into that hermit mode.
Yeah.
When in fact, what would be the most healing thing to do is to get back out into the world. You see this when grandma loses grandpa, and
and
plenty of people around until the funeral, and then afterwards, grandma's kind of on her own, and we are meant to, if you go back to our, earliest tribal lives, when you lost someone, the community would come together
and adopt you,
help you
be
heal.
around you. And not just for the first week, but like ongoing, you would be incorporated, and there would be kids running around your hut, and you would, still be surrounded by people. I think that's really true.
You're doing, by the way, being to talk about this, to share your experience is so incredibly healing. There's another conversation I had with my spirit guides. It sounds a little tangential, but they were talking about how prior to the internet, and this is broadly speaking, when people were looking for expert help somehow, they were looking for the PhD, the person with letters after their name. Now, what they observe is that what we're looking for is someone who has walked the same path as us, who've had the same kind of experience. So if you've gone through an experience like this and come out the other side, that is so healing. That's inspiring, and it's life-saving. It's life-transforming. It's a wonderful thing.
That has surprised me. That has surprised me. I mean, my MO has always been to heal, learn, teach. Just since I was a little girl, it's always just, that's what I do. And I wasn't really thinking about it when Sammy died. And once again, all of these things, I couldn't tell you why I did them. It wasn't a decision point. It wasn't like I sat down and said, oh, I think I'll sit here bawling on social media, on camera. Like, I would have never signed up to do that. But for some reason, something told me to turn the camera on. And then I had this moment of like, ew, should I really post this? Oh, fuck it. I'm just going to post it because I'm being told to post it. So I'm going to post it. And then there's just this onslaught of people saying, oh my gosh, like you're helping me understand how to do this. You're helping me understand that it's okay. You're helping me not feel so alone. If you can do this, I can do it too. And so then it just kept going from there. But I think you're absolutely right. There's something so powerful in being open with your vulnerability and sharing your story, whatever your story is, whatever your pain is. I mean, not necessarily like, you can when you're in the deepest dark night of the soul, but as you're learning and healing, to share that wisdom with the world. To me, that's one of the greatest gifts of the internet and social media
I agree.
is that capacity to be in community, even though we don't all live in the same village.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that it's a spiritual act. A spiritual act is when you heal yourself by helping those who suffer as you've done, whether it's this life or a past life. And it kind of, in a way, doesn't get better than that. It's like you're healing, you're helping other people to heal. It's phenomenally powerful, and in ways that you won't even know until you process this life on the astral plane. You can't always you can't tell all the lives that you've touched. And there are so many people.
The whole tapestry. Yeah.
Another interesting thing is that you are working through a past life fear of rejection too. When you've got rejection and loss, rejection comes from abandonment and past life.
Yeah, you're working,
have that. Yeah, you're working. Again, we can talk more about this when we have a one-on-one. But it's a big one for this life. Now, this very interesting thing that I found is that I started doing a lot of podcast interviews when my last book came out, and I like I've done for you, a little reading, just so I kind of got a sense of what's going on with the person who's interviewing me. And I found that everybody who interviewed me had a past life fear of rejection that they were working through, every single person. And what's fascinating about that is that by being a podcaster, bringing people together, what you're doing is you're creating community, because there are three ways that I identify to heal a fear of rejection. One is to do the past life work. I would say that's the most important thing. Second thing is to belong. But the third thing is to be the uniter. If you can be the Pied Piper or the person who draws people in, that is super healing. It's spiritual. It's going to be massively consistent with your soul's life plan, and it will give you fulfillment, and it will grow and grow.
Yeah, I would say that for sure, that this community is, I feel deeply connected to them, as well as myself, in a way that I didn't 2 or 3 years ago. It was more of like part of my job and, interacting with people just like I would anywhere. But I would say over the past 2 or 3 years, I feel extremely connected and close emotionally, even though I don't know most of them personally. Right. I feel very emotionally and energetically close to this listening community and to my social media community, where I feel like I'm talking with friends.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me. Yeah. So we're
on a very deep level, you will feel, you're going to feel the love.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. I could talk to you forever. I'm definitely going to set up a session with you to dive into Sammy, and I'll share with you guys at some point the highlights of my personal session with Ainslie. We'll see what he has to say about Sammy, and I'll share that with you, because I know that many parents are here who have lost children or people who have lost loved ones. And obviously every dynamic is different, but I know that we're all in this together. So as I heal and learn, I'll teach you guys too, or share with you guys. Where can people find you, Ainslie? I know you have a website, Ainslie MacLeod, which is, by the way, spelled AINSLIE, and MacLeod is spelled MACLEOD. AinslieMacLeod.com. This is in the show notes, so you'll be able to find the links there, and you can read his newest book, right? Which is, what's the title of your newest book?
It's called The Old Souls Guidebook.
Old Souls Guidebook. Yeah.
And also soulworld.com if you want to learn about my membership program.
Oh, well, that's really easy. Soulworld.com. Okay, good. Thank you for all that you are and the work that you do in the world, and for joining us on The Language of Love.
Oh, gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, and thank you for all that you do, too.
Thank you.